We have huge national debt. We have chronic unemployment. Really, if you do the proper analysis considering who's dropped out of the workforce, we have unemployment as bad today as it was during the height of the recession, and foreign policy problems now. Where do you think President Obama will go down in history in the pantheon of presidents? For example, you mentioned the Carter comparison earlier.
Yeah, I don't think we know yet. I would say that he is likely to leave a wrecked economy, a wrecked healthcare system, and potentially a wrecked foreign policy. I mean, we're seeing, in a sense, all of the bad policies coming home to roost. If that happens, he'll rank somewhere between Jimmy Carter and James Buchanan. Buchanan is clearly the worst president in American history. Carter is significantly less bad than Buchanan, but pretty bad. And I think it's conceivable another year or two of this floundering, and you could have him ranked below Carter in terms of just being ineffective.
Now, the debut Crossfire program did feature Senator Rand Paul, who's considered a libertarian-leaning Republican, but a new face to the libertarian wing, if you will, within the Republican Party. Clearly, there's a growing split. You have Ted Cruz and Mike Lee and so forth, Rand Paul. Where do you think we're going with this? Could we be seeing the rise of libertarian as really a viable political force, not just on the margins within the Republican Party, but perhaps even leading the charge if we look forward?
Yeah, I think it's partly libertarian and partly populist anti-establishment. I think that you have, and Peggy Noonan wrote a very good column making this point about the Syrian fight, that the Syrian fight's really between the American people and the American elites. And it's no accident that you had elites in both parties who favored doing something in Syria, and yet you had an entire country screaming no.
Right.
And that's an example of what's happening. So I think it's more than, and I think it's very dangerous for traditional analysts to try to take a Ted Cruz or a Rand Paul or a Mike Lee and put them into just an ideological framework. They also, I think, exist in a psychological framework. They are the early warning signals of being totally fed up with the traditional Washington establishment. And they don't get any of their rewards from the old order. I mean, their rewards are all from people who represent the outside and who are looking at changing things, not at accommodating things. You know, Speaker Rayburn used to say, you go along to get along. Okay? These guys aren't trying to get along. These guys want to, in fact, change the system, even if that makes some of the senior members very uncomfortable.
I want to talk a little bit, take advantage of this opportunity to talk current politics and future politics. Hillary Clinton. Seems to me the irony of her presumed frontrunner status in the Democratic Party is that if you go back to 2008, before the rise of a senator from Illinois named Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton was presumed to be the Democratic frontrunner, and here she is again. It would seem to suggest that she by no means has things locked up. Of course, she's very savvy, tough. She also has some Benghazi issues, other issues related to her legacy as Secretary of State. How do you see her strength right now? It's no cakewalk for her.
No, I thought up until April of 2008 that she would win, just because I thought the weight of the machine, her professionalism, the network they'd built nationwide over what was by then almost a 30-year period. And I was surprised. I mean, I was just wrong. So I look at it now. She's clearly the front runner. She may even be the prohibitive front runner. But you take things like this fight. I mean, here's somebody who was for the Iraq War, and that was, after all, what Obama used to beat her. Now she is for the president in Syria. Well, she's in a country where 85% of the country doesn't agree. So she's beginning to create a space for somebody new to emerge, to say she's a terrific person, but she's the old order. We need somebody new. And I think, you know, her natural caution, and at the same time the inability of the Clintons to go away for a little while. You know, Ronald Reagan, after he lost in '76, went to the ranch, wrote columns, did a daily news radio feed, but he basically relaxed. You know, rode his horses, fixed fences, thought about things. And he gave people, somebody once said, if you don't leave, you can't come back. And to some extent, the Clintons find it very hard to get off stage long enough to be fresh when they return.
Chris Christie on the GOP side, is he too radioactive right now with the GOP base to be considered a leading contender for the nomination in your view?
I don't think we have any way of knowing right now.
Just too soon.
I mean, here's a guy who is aggressive, abrasive, takes things head on. In some ways, if you're an anti-government conservative, there are aspects of Christie you really like. In other ways, if you're a traditional values conservative, there are aspects of Christie that drive you nuts. If he emerges, and I think he's going to have a big victory this fall in New Jersey. I mean, the kind of victory that's historic. You don't think of Republicans taking a state like that, doing the things he's done, taking on the unions the way he did, and then winning a big landslide re-election. If he can pull that off, he clearly has the credentials to be one of 10 or 12 candidates. And I do think governors, even though the news media focuses on senators, I think governors are very formidable. I mean, I think John Kasich, if he gets reelected, Scott Walker, if he gets reelected, I think Rick Perry very probably will run again and be much more formidable than people expect. So you could have 6 or 8 governors as well as 5 or 6 senators when the dance starts.
Now, you've been critical. I read a recent, I believe it was a CNN column that you wrote, and you've been critical about the lack of, shall we say, perhaps ingenuity or land-breaking type of reforms coming from conservatives, specifically related to Obamacare, for example. So where are the positive alternatives that Republicans need to ask? Why do you think there's seemingly a dearth of those? I mean, there are some alternatives been put forward, but not a comprehensive overall plan.
Well, start with the fact that screaming no is easy. Having to think through a policy. A good example is Dr. Tom Price, who is a very senior Republican, is a medical doctor. He has a very sound bill. It's a big building block towards replacing Obamacare. Dr. Mike Burgess. I mean, we have, I think, 13 or 15 doctors in the House now. And it's almost like big government has actually driven doctors into politics to protect their profession. So we have guys who, each of whom is adding a piece to this puzzle. But we haven't had the kind of systematic effort to bring it together into a single bill and then to really make that bill what Jack Kemp did with supply-side economics and 3-year tax cuts in the Kemp-Roth bill. And I think they badly need that. I mean, they need it partially for credibility, but they also need it to learn how to govern. One of the great problems conservatism has today is it doesn't have a program for replacing the left. So we know how to oppose the left. We can yell no. But then when we take over, what's our replacement for EPA? What's our replacement for the way Fish and Wildlife does certain things? What's our replacement for an incompetent Internal Revenue Service? I mean, there's a lot of stuff that has to be replaced, not just repaired, and we don't have bold enough. I'm thinking back to Ronald Reagan in 1975 at the second CPAC convention saying that we need bold colors, no pale pastels. Well, we need bold, positive replacements, not just yelling no.
And coming back to Obama, we all remember when George W. Bush left office. That last about 18 months was painful. He was a lame duck, and the phrase Bush fatigue entered the political lexicon. Could we be looking at Obama fatigue that makes Bush fatigue pale by comparison?
I think we'll know better if you see the number of people willing to watch him speak drop dramatically. I thought it was a terrible mistake on his part to go on 6 networks yesterday. I think it demeans the presidency. The question is, can he give one speech tonight from the Oval Office that works? If it does, then he's hit a home run. If it doesn't, everything he did yesterday is irrelevant. And I think that they misunderstand this. The great power of the presidency is to attract everybody into one conversation. And when you dribble him out there and you have him speak in Sweden and speak in St. Petersburg and go on 6 different networks, you are gradually, slowly diminishing the presidency as a communications device. I always remind people that you have to be the communicator-in-chief before you can be the commander-in-chief. And I think that there's a very real danger that your question is going to turn out to be prescient and that, in fact, we will have Obama fatigue, and he'll simply lose an ability to move the country.
Well, last question then, Mr. Speaker, turning back to CNN, the Crossfire program, weekdays, 6:30 p.m. Eastern. And we understand that one of your co-hosts, you have developed kind of a grudging respect, and maybe more than respect, a friendship with Van Jones, a former Obama administration official, very controversial on the right. Can you tell us a little bit about what surprised you?
Yeah, it's interesting when you actually work with people and you're not in the middle of a campaign and you're not just setting out to hammer each other, and you learn from each other. Van is really trying to rethink how to help the poor. I mean, he accepts that liberalism in its traditional form hasn't worked, but he also doesn't want to abandon the problem and walk off. And so one of his ideas, for example, is to incentivize prison wardens by the percent of people who leave prison and get a job and stay out of prison. So if your prison does a really great job of helping people
kind
grow
of a
up,
free market capitalist
it is.
idea,
I mean,
is
the
it
first
not?
time he told me that, I looked at him and I said, this doesn't sound like you at all. But his answer was, look, I want to figure out what will work, because I think people's lives are too important to just get trapped in ideology. So both Callista and I have gotten to be very fond of Van. We think he's an enormous asset for Crossfire. But we also think it's the beginning of an interesting relationship, kicking around ideas. And I've shared with him a chapter from my new book, Breakout, on helping the poor to get his ideas back in, which is something 6 months ago would never have occurred to me to do.
Well, Speaker Gingrich, thanks so much for joining
Good to be
us
with
on
you.
Newsmax TV,
Thank
and
you.
we will be looking to see the new Crossfire. And thank you for joining Newsmax TV.